Custer County, Idaho Territory, October 1893. That year, the first snow arrived nearly 3 weeks earlier than anyone expected. By the time most homesteaders realized that winter wasn't simply approaching, but had already begun, Samuel Hale was digging something beneath his own cabin that, from a distance, looked disturbingly like a grave. In the small town of Chalice, people talked about it for days. Riders slowed their horses when passing his land, staring at the long trench that disappeared beneath the wooden cabin he had built only a few months earlier. It was a 36-foot tunnel carved into the Idaho soil, reaching well below the frost line. All that work appeared to serve just one purpose: a fire pit located about 10 feet away from the house. There was no stovepipe rising from Hale's roof, no iron chimney sending smoke into the sky like every other cabin in the valley. At the general store, an old rancher named Whitcomb shook his head and muttered, "He's digging his own grave before the cold does." At an elevation of nearly 6,000 feet, winter in that region was not simply a season, it was a serious test of survival. And according to every neighbor within miles, Samuel Hale had chosen to face it without even placing a stove inside his house. But Samuel Hale had not always been a farmer. Before arriving in Idaho, even before coming to America, he had worked as a railway engineer in the mountains of Europe. His job involved designing steam tunnels through frozen rock and calculating airflow for locomotives that had to function in brutal sub-zero winters. For nearly 19 years, he studied how heat moved, how steam carried energy through long iron pipes, and how temperature was not only about fire, but about the direction heat traveled. In his mind, the flame itself was not the important part. What mattered was how long the heat stayed useful. When Hale arrived in Idaho and saw settlers burning enormous amounts of wood while still sitting in nearly freezing cabins, he immediately recognized the problem. A cast iron stove could burn at nearly 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, yet most of that heat escaped straight up the chimney within seconds. Nearly 80% of the heat disappeared into the sky. To Hale, a chimney was not a heating device, it was simply an escape route. So he reversed the system. Instead of allowing smoke to rise immediately upward, he forced it to travel sideways and underground first. The fire pit sat at the northwest edge of his property, 4 feet deep and lined with granite stone. From the base of that pit began a tunnel sloping gently downward. It was reinforced with stone and timber and stretched beneath several parts of the property. First, it passed under the root cellar, then beneath the livestock shed. Finally, it ran under the wooden floor of the cabin before rising again to reach a chimney located 14 feet higher on the opposite side of the property. That difference in elevation created natural suction. Because hot air always rises, the smoke was pulled through the entire 36-foot tunnel without the need for any mechanical assistance. Under the root cellar, the tunnel widened slightly. The gentle warmth passing through kept vegetables from freezing. Beneath the livestock shed, the curved in an extended S shape. This slowed the movement of smoke and warmed the ground enough so the animals would never stand on frozen earth. Under the cabin, Hale built a small chamber where the smoke slowed even further before leaving through the chimney. In that chamber, the remaining heat transferred into thick granite walls. Those stones slowly released warmth upward through the floor, long after the fire itself had faded. By November, the trench was sealed and the ground restored. From the outside, the homestead looked completely ordinary. But the mocking did not stop. Some neighbors warned that carbon monoxide would leak through the floorboards. Others insisted that spring snowmelt would flood the tunnel and cause it to collapse. Even some of Hale's relatives refused to visit, saying his experiment was dangerous and foolish. Hale answered the criticism calmly each time. "I'm not fighting winter," he said. "I'm reducing waste." Most settlers did not believe such thinking mattered. In their minds, survival simply meant burning more wood, not less. Then January arrived. On January 3rd, the temperature dropped to -18 degrees Fahrenheit. By January 5th, it had fallen to -32 degrees Fahrenheit, and on January 8th, a brutal Arctic wind pushed the thermometer down to -47 degrees Fahrenheit, the coldest temperature recorded in Idaho Territory at that time. Across Custer County, chimneys roared day and night. Families fed their stoves every 2 hours. Water froze indoors. Root cellars turned into ice chambers. Livestock died standing in poorly heated barns. At the Hale homestead, however, only one single fire burned in the outdoor pit. It was refueled roughly every 6 hours. The smoke slipped quietly into the earth and disappeared. For days, neighbors assumed the silence meant disaster. Then on January 10th, Whitcomb rode past the property again and noticed something strange. From the chimney at the far end of Hale's land rose a thin, steady stream of smoke, calm and controlled. Snow on the cabin roof above the buried tunnel had partially melted despite the severe cold. Curious, Whitcomb approached the house and knocked. When the door opened, a wave of warmth flowed out. It wasn't the sharp blast of a roaring stove. Instead, it was a deep, steady warmth that seemed to rise from the ground itself. Inside, Whitcomb looked around in confusion. There was no stove in the room, no visible fire, only a wooden table and calm, warm air. Through the soles of his boots, he could feel heat coming from the floor. Hale quietly pointed towards a thermometer hanging on the wall. It read 54 degrees. Outside, the temperature was -45 degrees. They checked the root cellar, 39 degrees, vegetables still fresh. They checked the livestock shed, 34 degrees, the cattle calm and comfortable. Whitcomb's own barn had dropped below 0 days earlier, and he had already lost 2 calves. Standing there, feeling the warmth rising from the ground, he finally understood Hale's design. The smoke had been forced to work. Instead of escaping immediately, it traveled slowly through granite-lined tunnels for nearly 40 seconds, transferring its heat into surrounding stone and soil. Granite, with its high heat capacity, absorbed heat slowly and released it just as slowly, functioning like a massive thermal battery. The earth itself acted as insulation. One fire, maximum heat extraction, minimal waste. By the end of that winter, Samuel Hale had burned less than half the firewood used by his neighbors. He lost no livestock, no stored crops, and never endured the sleepless nights many others faced. He continued living on that land for another 27 years. His underground heating system operated through nearly 3 decades of Idaho winters without major repairs. When modern oil furnaces eventually became available, Hale refused to install one. He said, "There is no reason to burn twice when once is enough." After his death, his wife discovered a journal entry he had written on the coldest day of 1894. It read, "They say fire must rise straight to heaven, but heaven does not warm children. If smoke must leave, let it leave tired. Let it work for every inch of its escape. Flame is not warmth. Warmth is what remains after the flame has finished its labor." And beneath a quiet wooden cabin in Idaho Territory, for 36 feet of buried stone tunnel, the smoke truly did its work before ever touching the sky.